Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Rich Allen and Peter Rutzler. Now that international football is on the back burner until March, it's time to dig into the real meat of the Ligue season. And now is where teams really need to start performing. So who made the jump and who's still in the doghouse? All of that and more, including a few of your questions after the latest headlines. Saint-Etienne got their new regime off to a bad start as Julien Sablé's side lost 3-1 in his first home game away game, on Friday to Lille. The hosts have now won 2 in a row as well, thanks to a third goal in 2 games from Nicolas Pepe and a double assist from Anwar El Ghazi. Amiens also impressed later that evening as they earned a point against Monaco. The champions were behind for 60 minutes of the game, but Stefan Jovetic saved their blushes after Serge Gakpe opened the scoring. Paris Saint-Germain remain unbeaten after beating Nantes 4-1 at the Parc des Princes. A double from Edinson Cavani saw his league-leading total reach 15 in just 13 Ligue 1 matches. In the multiplex, Rennes were defeated in their first match under new boss Sabri Lamouchi, with Morgan Amalfitano seeing red in their 2-1 loss to Strasbourg. While in Dijon, they earned their first back-to-back wins of the season, with Junior Tavares notching a brace in their 3-1 win at home to Troyes. Elsewhere on Saturday, bottom side Metz managed a goalless draw against Toulouse despite having Fallou Diagne sent off after 23 minutes, and Guingamp held on to a 1-1 scoreline against Angers after seeing Luca Doe receive his marching orders in the second half. On Sunday, Caen fought back in added time to draw at home with Nice, who went ahead through Pierre-Lise Melou, but Ronnie Rodelin earned a point for the surprise package, while Toulouse earned their third draw against Montpellier, earned their third draw against the top 3 sides as they kept Lyon to a stalemate at the Parc OL. And in the final game of the weekend, Morgan Sanson scored in the last kick of the game to earn a 1-1 draw against Bordeaux. Nicolas de Préville put the hosts ahead with his first goal for the club inside 3 minutes, but they could not hold on to the 3 points. Finally, this evening, Amiens made it 6 unbeaten in all competitions as they won their rescheduled fixture against Lille 3-0. The visitors will be slightly aggrieved, having led the initial match when it was abandoned due to a stand barrier collapsing, injuring several visiting supporters. And that's all for the news. But remember, to stay up to date with all your French football news, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with Ligue, who parted ways with Oscar Garcia this week. It was a bit of surprise to many, Rich, but what do you think to the move overall?
It seemed that there was a growing sense of a sort of parting of ways between Oscar Garcia and where he wanted to take the club, and then the sort of board level and what they saw as the future and for the progress of Saint-Etienne. I think it's been quite clear for a few weeks now that those tensions have taken a turn for the worse. I think performances on the pitch were perhaps a reflection of that. So maybe that this was something that, on the face of it, from the start that Saint-Etienne had made, and how long they gave Galtier, and it seems quite a snap move, but Garcia was obviously not happy. From what I think people can gather is that there were perhaps promises made with regards to acquisitions that were made in the summer, and then performances recently have led to some of the senior bods behind the scenes questioning Garcia not liking that, taking umbrage to their sort of perceived interference. And it sort of culminated with everybody throwing their toys out the pram and Garcia quitting and saying, that's enough of that. Thank you very much. Writing really was on the wall, I think, after that ridiculous 5-0 home defeat to Lyon. You can't put in a performance as abject as that against your biggest rivals and not expect there to be some serious repercussions throughout the entire squad. So I would like to have seen them, sort of try and work on their differences, because, with the start of the season, I'll include myself. I was very positive with what Garcia seemed to be doing with the club. They were putting in some really attractive displays. They looked great going forward. They were scoring goals, playing entertaining football, all things that seemed to have been lacking from the sort of tail end of the Galtier era. And so it's quite refreshing to see a Saint-Etienne side that played that way. Slowly but surely, those behind-the-scenes issues have bubbled away. And, in recent weeks, we've seen a real downturn in performances, almost taking steps back to sort of the way that they played under Galtier, and perhaps regressing even further back. Because some of the performances that they put in recently, to pick out some, losing away at Troyes, losing at home to Montpellier, and then obviously then the drubbing at home to Lille, it's just not good enough for this Saint-Etienne side. So it's a shame that this, Garcia era couldn't have gone on any further, but ultimately, if those kind of tensions are existing, then there's only one inevitability.
Yeah, and it stems back all the way really to the summer, Peter. I mean, there was issues on both sides at the end of it. The Spaniard obviously disappointed that he'd given a dossier of 20 to 25 players, and all of them had pretty much been rejected by the board in one way or another. I remember Bojan being one of those players he was looking at. The players that the club really wanted, like Lois Diony, who did eventually go over the line, was rejected 3 times by Garcia. Obviously, he's not played an enormous amount as we might have expected so far this season. That could be the reason why. And then the board are also annoyed that the lack of attacking football that they thought they might get under Garcia, having suffered, might be the not the best way of putting it, but under Galtier, he does play a defensive style of football. But where do you think the issues lie? Is this an issue with the board not flexing enough under a new manager, or is this a case of a manager maybe wanting too much autonomy?
I think it's a bit of both. You touched on the major issues there, and I think Rich covered it very well as well. Quite clearly, there is more than just the heavy defeat at Lyon, which was essentially the final nail in the coffin. I think L'Equipe said on Thursday, they were talking about how he had problems with the internal operating of the club, some kind of almost amateurism. And you look at some of the key figures at the top, Chairman Roland Romayer, they've been there a while. They don't see the issue as anything to do with themselves. But as you say, that he's obviously come in with a remit to reform the way they're playing. Under Galtier, they weren't the most attractive side, and the remit was to make them more attacking, and obviously that stems from his Barcelona heritage. And we did see glimpses of that at the start with their 3 wins on the trot, and it seemed as though maybe they were going in that direction, but quite clearly this has been nibbling away behind the scenes, and that interaction between himself and the board and the way they're doing things has come to a head. And I think transfers is very important. If you are going to change the philosophy of any club, you need to bring in the right players. I mean, you can look at Frank de Boer at Crystal Palace, who was given the same sort of remit, wasn't he? He was given the remit of coming in, bringing that Dutch, almost Cruyffian, similar kind of a focus, I guess, if you consider the legacies of Ajax and Barcelona. But he had to do it with a Crystal Palace squad that was rooted in rigidity. And I think you can make some comparisons here with Saint-Etienne. I mean, the players they brought in weren't who Garcia wanted, and they certainly I think there was a differencing of opinion there. I mean, Cabella was a good addition very late on. I haven't seen too much of him, though. Hasn't helped by injuries and absentees. I think Garcia would have wanted a bigger change, but then at the same time, with any kind of wholesale change, you need to give them time. And Garcia wasn't given that, but it seems as though, at least from his perspective, he didn't think he would be given the opportunities to make the most of any time, judging from the fact that he didn't take a severance pay for his dismissal that this is quite clearly a mutual agreement, or at least coming from Garcia as much as of the club. But in terms of squad, I think there is that element to it. We saw, I think when we started, we were lauding, the brightness of Bamba, finally, showing some potential, and Darbo as well being brought back in from the cold. And then you see the contrast now, I think, against Lyon. Bamba is shrouded in the contract nonsense, and Darbo didn't start. That's just one set of examples. So yeah, no, it's certainly a bit of both in terms of whether it's backroom or his own motivation there. But it was a little bit of a shock, but quite clear this has been bubbling away for some time.
Yeah, it felt like Garcia maybe doubted himself midway through that spell of performing well. It started to go a little bit more stale, and he went away from playing like the likes of Darbo and DUC, who started the season really well together, as being a bit more forward-thinking midfielders than what we've experienced in Saint-Etienne recently. And when you've got players like Bamba and Hamouma, who are creative, excellent players, and I'm still surprised he didn't at least give Diony a chance. I mean, he's a Ligue 1 goal scorer. He scored plenty for Dijon last season, and he should be getting more for Saint-Etienne, really, if he gets the chances there. It just seemed a little bit odd, really, but it's a new era with Lever, Rich, and that falls on Julien Sablé. Does this feel more like a yes man for the board, maybe a similar move to, ironically, their crosstown rivals in Lyon with Bruno Genesio, of maybe someone that the board now will do exactly as they require?
Oh, I think absolutely. Unlike with Lyon, there was a need to get the squad back on side with a coach. I don't think there was too much. There was too many issues between the bulk of the squad and Garcia. But this is very much their guy now. He will, toe the party line. But ultimately, any new coach is going to be under pressure with this Saint-Etienne squad. If their remit is we want attractive football, the problem you've got is this is still, for the most significant part anyway, is still a Galtier squad. There's still Galtier players. There's still really I think quite a significant lack in spark and in sort of creativity going forward. We saw glimpses that Garcia may have, over time, may have possessed the talent to mould and remould and morph that squad into a more sort of pleasing on the eye team. But ultimately, it was still a Galtier squad. It was still, I'd use this term to describe Saint-Etienne, it's sort of stodgy side that desperately, I think, really wanted to continue playing that sort of five at the back. You will not score past us mentality that the board clearly wanted to move on from. Whether the new coaching appointment will allow them to do that, I struggle to see how. I struggle to see what sort of coach that Saint-Etienne could realistically get could come in and get that team performing to the style that the board want. I think if the board wants a change in style, and I think it was the same argument as P mentioned that Frank de Boer faced, you've got to give him time. If you're not going to give him the squad, you've got to give him time. And the board made it clear that he wasn't going to get the squad that he wanted in the summer. And unfortunately, then they haven't been able to come to some kind of agreement over giving him the time to morph it. So ultimately, unless things change in the January transfer window, and quite significant changes are making, the board aren't going to get that style of play that they want.
No, I think it was more surprising to hear the bosses say that he was the permanent manager. There was no interim about Sablé's appointment. It seems like it restricts themselves a little bit too much, really, in attempting to try and find another one. I mean, we're comparing it to some England jobs in England, at least anyway, in the likes of West Ham and Everton, where they are looking for essentially a stopgap until maybe trying for the summer. Maybe Saint-Etienne maybe should have thought down that lines. But let's talk about the game really on Friday night. And with a new man in charge, the results really don't change so quickly. I mean, Lille came in. Well, Lille hosted them and played really well. Bounced back again from that Marseille game, Peter. The Lille are starting to find something about themselves. I know they obviously lost this evening, but it's a little bit extenuating circumstances in the sense that they played Friday, but so did Amiens, obviously. So it's a little bit of a moot point, but they performed really well in this one, especially in the second half.
Yeah, no, they did. I mean, it does taint it a little bit by how they did tonight. I mean, they weren't that poor tonight. They did actually do quite well. It's just that Amiens were very effective in how they set up and caught them 3 times and put them to the sword a little bit. But yeah, it was an impressive win. And although Saint-Etienne's form has been poor, as we all know, I thought I was quite impressed with Lille, actually. And it was nice to see some of those names they brought in, the youngsters, showing the talent that they've got. You had Arojo, you had Ponce getting on the score sheet as well, the loanee from Roma. You had that wonderful goal from Thiago Mendes. Beautiful curling effort from outside the penalty area. And, for once they combine their dominance of the ball with goals. One of the major issues with the pressing game that the Bielsa makes them play is that when they do go forward and do try to doggedly win the ball back, they leave themselves horribly exposed, and that was made evident by the performance tonight. I think their recent back-to-back wins, of course, against Metz, it was it was a bit hit and miss in terms of whether they deserved it or not. But we saw huge positives against Marseille before that, although they lost, and they probably deserved to win that game. And it seems like they're slowly coming around to how Bielsa wants them to play, and Bielsa is adapting slightly to compensate for the defensive holes and gaps that the way they're playing has so far led to. Tonight was really disappointing. They were caught out. The second goal was a mistake. Some very well taken goals by Amiens, but they were not very. They don't have that focal point. Lille, they're not very ruthless. They're not very clinical, and they don't create too many clear-cut chances. It's not helped by Nicolas Pepe being up front. He did score on Friday night. It was a good header, but it was poor defending from Pogba and Pierre Gabriel, and there was no communication between the two. But he doesn't provide that focal point, and it does seem that they've missed that. And it's, it comes from the decision to sell Depreville. But it's still Lille in that crucial point still. I mean, Luis Campos, who's part of the setup as part of the project, he's been linked with Chelsea, and obviously the technical director role left open by Michael Emenalo. So it feels like if without the previous 2 successive wins and Friday night, of course, you're looking at a Bielsa gone, potentially a Campos gone, and suddenly the project's in tatters. That's one potential outlook. But the results have meant that we're still seeing it, and they're giving time to Bielsa, something that wasn't the case at Saint-Etienne, as we were saying. So I was impressed on Friday, less so tonight. But it's the positives they're taking forward, and it's good for the atmosphere around the squad, and it's good to see the younger, the talented players they brought in the summer. Some of them starting to really show their potential.
Yeah, and one player I really thought played well at the weekend was Anwar El Ghazi. He sets up 2 of the goals. The first especially was an excellent cross for Nicolas Pepe, and I think he has every right to go and give him a little bit of a smack, really, if he misses that kind of chance. It was begging for someone to bury it in there. It's nice to see him after a couple of years, really, of struggling to find a new place, get a little bit of a good start for Lille, although tonight's result taints it a little bit. But the winners of that game, Amiens, what a couple of days, really, it's been for the club. One of the real surprises of the weekend, at least, was them earning a point against Monaco. Rich, it was a cracking result, wasn't it? And arguably, they could have won that game.
Absolutely. I don't want to do Amiens a disservice, but it should be caveated that this was a very poor Monaco performance, but Amiens contained them. I mean, they've looked very comfortable. I was one of those at the start of the season that thought, a wonderful story, Amiens being up, but they're just going to be absolute whipping boys. By the 3rd week, I was happy to be sort of, well, not happy as, but I was being proved right. You know, they not scored. They were, you know, on the end of next year in their opening game, actually didn't play too badly, but then lost at home to Angers, comfortably beaten away at Saint-Etienne. And you thought, you know, oh, is it going to be one of these sort of sorry stories of everybody wanting Amiens to do well, but they just, you know, they're sort of relegated by February kind of thing. But then they got their win over Nice and a few nerves. But yeah, this current run has been incredible. You know, for a side that have effectively sort of come from nowhere the last couple of seasons, for me, it's how comfortable they look in defence. You know, so many teams that come up from the second division, you know, they're just going to leak goals. I mean, they're not doing that. They're looking incredibly organised. They don't look panicked. They know what they're doing. They're setting up properly. You know, everybody's playing with playing as part of the team. And yeah, it's just a terrific run of performances. You know, you really can't fault them. And then, okay, with, you know, a comfortable win tonight, but that results at home to Monaco. You know, it's the one that stands out. And they were terrific. You know, they didn't look overawed by Monaco. They didn't look panicked by the proposition that they were coming up against. They were incredibly organised. And as you say, yeah, they could have sneaked it. Yeah, they certainly had the chances. Maybe that's the only criticism you can have of Amiens at the minute, is arguably they're not quite scoring enough. 3-0 tonight maybe renders that moot as well, as we've recently discussed. But I've been thoroughly impressed by them, and, you know, pleased to see they're just to be put to the sword week in, week out.
Yeah, and I remember a few chances, really, especially for Moussa Konaté. I think he had 2 or 3 where even he couldn't believe he'd try not hit the target on some of them. They really did excellently, I thought, especially in the first half. They looked like a lot of teams that come against those sort of big sides do play a solid defensive game and just kind of see what happens from there. But no, Amiens were willing to take the game to him. I thought Gakpe and Kakuta were both excellent as well on either side of the forward. I thought they broke well into dangerous areas and really gave a real good account of themselves. Yes, there's the caveat that Monaco weren't so great, and also one eye might be on that Champions League fixture tomorrow as well. But they were really, really superb. And the point would be, Peter, and it's punctuated by tonight's result with a 3-0 win, thanks to a double from Harrison Manzala and Moussa Konaté coming on and grabbing a goal as well, with Lassina Traoré starting, which seems like a world away from where he used to be, at least. Anyway, but these kind of results, especially so close to each other, they can give them so much confidence. I mean, looking at the table at the moment, it's a bit of a minefield at the moment. I mean, Caen in 6th are on 19 points, and Lille in 19th are on 12 points, and everyone's on a little bit in between. But 15 points in 13 games, it's nothing to not shout about, really, for a club that we expected to sink like a stone.
Yeah, no, I really agree with Rich as well. They've got this sort of, the way they play. It's not like a typical promoted side, either like Strasbourg, where they just go gung-ho at home games, or you know, they're leaky at the back. I was watching them tonight. I must have been one of the rare few who managed to watch it tonight. And they have this sort of security about the way they play. There's no sense of impending fear when another side comes forward. I mean, Lille had a lot of the ball this evening. And you always felt that they had some sort of sense of control of the game. It wasn't, at any stage, was out of touch of themselves, if that makes sense. And I was very impressed with them this evening. And yeah, their run of form has come at a really good time. It seems like that a lot of what Pellissier has been putting together is coming to fruition at the moment. It's never an easy task with back-to-back promotions. It's all their backstory is outlined really well by Adam and Eric's piece for the website, and it's on The Guardian as well. Because they've had their own squad surgery done to them, like many clubs in Ligue 1. It seems to be a recurring theme. Obviously, Abubakar Kamara went to Fulham, and the standout name is Tanguy Ndombele. he started the season so brightly, and what a talent he looks at Lyon. But they brought in really effective and useful players. Lassine Traoré, as you just mentioned, I mean, that's a really big coup for them, I would say. A couple of seasons ago, Serge Gnabry's got plenty of Ligue 1 experience, done the rounds as well, and obviously the standout name is Gaël Kakuta, and he looks to be the player that, or maybe this is his home. Maybe he's finally found a place where he can really push on. I mean, another assist this evening. His assist for Gakpo's goal was superb against Monaco. A knife through butter pass after an excellent first touch. You know, he's done the round since Chelsea. He's come in from China. They've picked him up and he's done well. And you know, they've made a really good fist of what they're doing at the moment. It's interesting that the league is tightening up the way it is. I mean, their run of form, 6 games without defeat now? The side nearest to them, Strasbourg, also back-to-back promotions, they've only lost 1 in the last 7. So you get this sort of condensing. Obviously, Lille have back-to-back wins before tonight. Excuse me. So you're looking at a condensed table, and it's important that Amiens kept touch with everyone. And that's something they've done, and they haven't been colour drift. And going forward, you would imagine that, you know, that they are going to put up a fight. I don't know if they're going to be able to have enough, but they've put themselves in a position to contest it in a way that, you know, sides in the past have come up and not been able to do. Especially seeing as the gap between Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 is so great. And obviously last season with the 6 sides in the 6-way showdown on the last day of the season, it just shows how compact it is in Ligue 2, and the step up is so much higher. Especially considering the 3rd tier, which is where Amiens were the season before, is barely professional. So they've done remarkably well so far, and tonight's result really is merited of their current form, and hopefully they can continue to keep it up. But, yeah, they've done very, very well. And
the statistic I quite like with them is that if you take tonight's game back when it should have been, which is the week 8 game, you include the 6 games, including that one, they've only conceded 4 goals. Now, only 2 teams have conceded fewer, and that's Toulouse and Montpellier. The context, Amiens have conceded 4 goals in that run. Monaco and Lyon have conceded 5. PSG have conceded 6. 8. Saint-Etienne conceded 12. I think only just goes to highlight, we bang on about, you know, if you score goals, you've got a chance of staying up. As obvious thing as it is to say, if you're going to have an incredibly strong defence, you're going to have just as much chance as well. So, you know, here's hoping that Amiens can continue that run.
The easiest comparison with Amiens is to Strasbourg, because both the sides have had back-to-back promotions. Strasbourg have invested. They play. Strasbourg defensively look all over the place at times. There is real fear when sides go forward with Kone and Mongan, who's now been dropped, thankfully, for them. But you don't get that with Amiens. There is real stability at the back, led by Gutner, their keeper, as well. So, you know, that's one of the main contrasts, and it is vitally important. I mean, where Strasbourg have improved is they've managed to outscore teams. With Amiens, they've shut the door, and it's been effective for them, and they're picking up the points.
Yeah, whisper it quietly. They feel a little bit like an Angers side that came up a couple of years ago, where they were defence first. Let's make sure we don't concede goals and try and create something with some crafty, intelligent play in the sort of in the further end. And although it's not as quite battering Rami as Sheikh and Doyle was in that first season, it's a little bit more graceful than that. They're starting to pick up points now. And you look at the couple of teams we've mentioned. I'm also going to include Dijon in this, who've won back-to-back games as well. The informed sides at that sort of more difficult half of the table. Amiens have got Metz next, who are pretty much cut adrift already, which is a worrying sign for them. Dijon have got Toulouse, who are flip-flopping every week. They seem to not be able to find their level. And Strasbourg are away to Saint-Etienne. There's some really good chances for them to keep picking up points at this time in period, like I mentioned earlier, that there's a lot of teams all bunched up together, especially on 15 points. I think there's 5 teams on 15 points at the moment, and there's another 2 following them on 14 and 1 on 16. It's a very, very close-knit thing with teams beating each other. Very exciting time really for Ligue 1. But moving on very quickly to their opponents, who have obviously Champions League assignment this Tuesday against RB Leipzig. A victory is all they need. Well, anything less than that might seal their fate. I mean, a defeat will definitely keep them out of Europe altogether. Rich, was this a bit of the same old worries we've had with Monaco so far this season? They're maybe not as secure defensively, I know, and they didn't really create as much. Teams are starting to sort of figure out how they're playing in the sort of 4-4-2.
I think so. I think there seems to be an element of if sort of get the ball to Falcao and hope that he scores. I think he's gone a couple of games after sort of a really, really strong start for him personally. I don't think he's quite been the same player the last few weeks. I mean, I've been a believer since it was apparent that all these changes that have happened and first couple of Champions League games didn't go their way. I believe that it's probably going to be best for Monaco to get out of Europe. That almost would include the Europa League in that. The way that club is set up, the key thing for them is to ensure that they get that Champions League place come the end of the season. I think it's quite clear now that they're probably not going to retain the league title, and so they need to be wary of the form of the teams behind them now. So for me, Europe is now becoming a bit of a distraction. It's not the squad that it was last season. Obviously, it was never going to be. But what I think Jardim now needs to do is, as he did last season, get that strongest 11, work out that strongest 11, and play them week in, week out. I still don't 100% think he knows quite what his strongest formation, what his strongest setup is yet. That in part could be one of the reasons why they've perhaps struggled. But as you say, this sort of only highlighted perhaps the issues that the team has faced the first part of the season.
Yeah, and I was going to mention in the brief intro that, and I'll bring you on this, Peter, as well, that they've got a couple of injuries at the moment, but they've had a little bit of trouble at right back. Dribio Sidibe's got a knock, and Almami Torre is currently out through illness, and that meant Andre Raji had to deputise in their stead, and he was really poor at the weekend. I mean, he got taken on about 2 or 3 or 4 separate occasions by almost different players as well. He lacked a little bit of pace, and Jemison was out of position a number of times. Glick felt like he was looking around and seeing if there was actually anyone in a Monaco shirt that was playing with him at the weekend. Are those defensive concerns that we had maybe at the start of last season sort of creeping back in?
They're a little uncharacteristic. I think Raji did have a bad game, but we better not say too many things bad about him because Eric will get upset about it. But yeah, no, he didn't have the best of games, and I would say that obviously injuries are important, and once we get Sidibe back, it should help them on that front. Defensively, it's uncharacteristic. I think what's lacking for me is midfield. I think that the loss of Bakayoko has actually been more profound than has been made out, and I think that's really affected them when they've tried to play a 4-4-2. I think Monaco are best when they play free in the middle, because I mean, against Amiens, they went with Tielemans and Fabinho. And Fabinho was excellent, as always. Tielemans was okay, but it's just the balance of the two. Whereas Bakayoko offered that ability to dominate games physically in a way that Tielemans can't do. And that provides insurance if you've got either or going forward and the other can work back. And I think Tielemans has either got to add that to his game or be sat in with a free. But then if you take a free, then you lose that explosive attackingness that Jardim's side had last year with 2 up top. And then you're looking at a 4-3-3 or a 4-5-1, just to provide that security, because they are a little bit exposed. And whereas before they would blow teams away very, very quickly, scoring high numbers of goals, and it wouldn't really matter, and sides didn't even get a look in. Now we're kind of seeing that, and when you've got a weakness, say at fullback, that's going to be exposed. I think I disagree slightly with you, Rich, about Europe. I completely agree that that Jardim definitely doesn't know his side at the moment. It's changing quite frequently. I think we were pretty close to it in terms of if he wants to play 4-4-2 with Jovetic once he starts to get a run of games. But I think Europe will offers Monaco that chance to develop, and they've got to keep in mind where they want to be. I mean, of course, it's essential that they get the Champions League spot, but I can't see anyone stopping them. Lyon are the closest side to them, and Marseille aren't going to join that top trio. So I think, in my opinion, I think Monaco will be fine in getting the Champions League spot, and I think it's important that they stay competition on the basis that it for them makes them more marketable in terms of saying the kind of club they want to be and attracting players. Of course, they have sold so many players to other clubs in the summer, but they're also able to recruit very well on the basis of who they are and what they've done in Europe as much as in Ligue 1. And Europe is the selling point, and as PSG well know. So for them to drop out of Europe entirely looks quite bad, not only for Monaco, but also for Ligue 1. But I think for them, it's essential that they show some kind of the fight. I think if they drop into the Europa League, they could go quite far. Obviously, it doesn't help in terms of number of games, but I think they've got enough players. I think Jardim is willing enough to try out as many different players as possible, trying to find his best 11 at the moment, that it wouldn't necessarily be a negative thing. That's my take on it. I don't know if you want to say anything on that, but it is development. I think this season is more of transition, but they've got to keep themselves at a level rather than drop off entirely.
Yeah, I think I'll very quickly end the European talk. The fact that I think it's one of my favourite ironies in world football is that every team wants to play in Europe, and yet after a certain stage it becomes, oh, Europe's a distraction. Let's get out of Europe now so we can qualify for Europe again and then get back into Europe. Well, that cycle will perpetuate forever and more. But let's move on to a game where it was better late than never, really, is what most would say. And Marseille certainly left it very late, literally to the last kick against Bordeaux at the weekend. Rich, this felt like a game. Richie's. Technical. Hello.
Hello.
Apologies for the technical issues there, everyone. There's might been a bit of a internet downtime that sort of cut us off a little bit. I'll pass that on to you, Peter, while Rich tries to rejoin us here. So the game on the weekend. So it felt like a bit like a game that both sides kind of summarised their seasons, didn't it?
Yeah, it did a little bit. It's frustration for Bordeaux and that they started well and then it ends badly, and Marseille, we still are none the wiser in terms of what they are. I read a of Marseille, actually. They're domineering but sterile, and I really, really like that in terms of how they approach games. It was a great start for Bordeaux and such a huge moment for Depreville to get that first goal. It's been so important that he scores for them. But again, the issues of profligacy struck in that Sankare missed two glorious chances which could have made the game a lot. So that said, Marseille, it wasn't as though Marseille didn't deserve to take a point from the game. But when you are 1-0 up in that position and it is stoppage time, you need to see those games out. And it was just a lump forward from Mondanda that fell kindly for Sanson. Druitt level. So it certainly does give that reflection of it being reminiscent of their season so far, for sure. I think with Marseille, we got this disjointedness feel, the Mitroglou offering very, very little up top. Obviously, I think Luis Gustavo was a big miss for them in the middle. And Thauvin was consistent as always. But then on the other hand, you had Bordeaux offering plenty of threat, yet little in terms of end product. Malcolm didn't have the best game, but I think in part that was due to Jordan Amavi, who I thought was absolutely superb at left back. And I think he's a boost for them in the wake of. He's going to help them pass over Everett. Not that they were worried about him anyway. But yeah, no, it's definitely reflective of their season so far, for sure.
Rich, let's focus on Bordeaux for a moment. Really, we mentioned in the last couple of weeks that they've looked a little disappointing, a little individualistic, you might say, but that they were better in this one, and it helped with an early goal and a nice finish from Depraville to finally get off the mark for the team. But again, they created a couple of opportunities for Sankharé, like Peter mentioned, but it just never really still isn't quite clicking in the way you would hope it with talents like Francois Camano and Malcolm on the wings. They should be a better attacking force than they are.
Yeah, I think it's no coincidence that the sort of Bordeaux run has stuttered slightly along with the form of Malcolm dropping off. He's such an integral player in how in everything good that Bordeaux do. I don't think the last few games he's quite been at the races. So perhaps it's not too much of a shock that in turn Bordeaux's form has followed suit. I still think they need. I'm a big fan of Depraville, and I know you are as well, and a lot of others are. I still think they need a more deadly striker. I do think they need a more out-and-out striker. Depraville can play a little deeper, can also play a little wider as well. I do think they miss, a more classical centre forward. Saying that. There's time. I'm a big fan of Gourvenec. Look at what he did with Guingamp. I'm pleasing so far with what he's doing with Bordeaux. But I do think that they're going through a little bit of a lull. And I think it's going to be a real test of his ability as to whether he can turn this around. Because certainly the start of the season, with the signings that they'd made over the summer, I thought this Bordeaux team would be challenging for certainly a top 5. Arguably, they could have even sneaked maybe get that third spot. But the current form they're doing, the current form that they're in, it's not quite good enough. And as you touched upon with your question to Peter, the 1-1 draw Sunday night was very, very typical of both teams, in so much as there's a lot of there's positives to take, but at the minute they're still not quite good enough to be a regular converter of 3 points.
And in this game, Bordeaux sat back a little bit further, especially when they did get the 1-0 head start, and especially in the second half. And that seemed to suit their defenders a lot more, especially Toulon, who had a pretty decent game. But it's a real gut punch, isn't it, Peter? To concede a goal, it's literally the last kick of the game. I mean, the referee blows the whistle. He doesn't bother with the kickoff. He just accepts that that's the goal that's finished the game, really. It's a real gut punch in the last minute, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, the atmosphere was fantastic as well. You had the ultramarine positively bouncing up until that point. It is a kick in the teeth at that point, because they had defended so well. And as you were saying, by sitting deeper, they were able to stifle Marseille. But then again, they're not really tested by Marseille's front line in terms of pace and acceleration. Mitroglou offers very, very little, other than the odd header or a tap-in after missing 3 or 4. Payet in the first half was very, very ineffective. Not helped, of course, by the fact he's come back from injury. But after half-time, when Maxime Lopez came on, they looked a little bit more influential going forward. Thauvin doesn't offer that pace. He is quick, but it's not something that's going to really test them. So there was also that side to why they weren't as exposed as they normally are, Bordeaux, which has been one of the problems that they've had, is that, as Rich was saying, once Malcolm's form drops off and they're not scoring at the other end and asserting controlling games, their defensive vulnerabilities are exposed. Toulalan did have a good game. You know, I thought he was good, but I still don't buy that he's a centre half. Levchuk was okay. A couple of rash challenges. I think the two of them as a defensive duo are not solid enough if they want to be a surefire fit for European football and European football contention. Conceding as they did will be a blow, and just in the basis that they want to end their current rut in form. For Marseille, it keeps up their unbeaten form, so that's a good thing. It's another confidence boost for them. But yeah, going forward, I think from a Marseille perspective, it's so difficult to assess them because of it's just how disjointed and I find that they are, to me, they're an odd side in the terms of the personnel they've got. They don't really seem to fit. It reminds me a little bit of Man United under Louis van Gaal, in terms of the latter end of Van Gaal, early Mourinho, the squad that they had, with all these different players. So you had your Blints, your Rojos, your Carrick, and then your Pogba in there and Zlatan. It just felt disjointed, and it feels a little bit like this with Marseille. It's almost as if they're halfway in their progression to build a team, which they are, of course, in terms of their Champions project. But it's difficult to see how they fit when you've got players like Germain and Ng on the bench. They do offer different things, but they come in and you've got Payet, who's much slower in terms of build-up, and you've got Mitroglou, who's not going to run, so he's not going to give them any options going forward. You've got Gustavo, who's excellent in midfield, interchange with either Anguissa or Sanson in the centre. And defensively, of course, they've got Rolando and Rami, who are aging and a bit slow on the turn. And I don't know. With Marseille, they're hard to pin down, but it does feel like they're still in that progression. And looking forward, they want to just be progressing, get into Europe again, and then move on forward. But for Bordeaux, as we've already covered, it's a question of finding that form again. And as Rich said, it's so reliant on Malcolm, and it shouldn't really be that, especially with attacking players they've got. And even though I agree they do need a central focal point, you know, players like Kamano and other players have brought in, Cafu, for example. Depravelin himself can change games. So really, it's not as though they don't have the arsenal. It's a question of actually performing, and it is a challenge for Gourvenec to address.
Yeah, it also reminds me of another sort of champions project, you would say, and another team, ironically, in Manchester City around the sort of 2008-2009 era, where you were seeing the likes of Tevez and Robinho mixing with Sean Wright-Phillips and Craig Bellamy and De Jong and Adebayor. It's just a mix of talent that have done reasonably well alongside a couple of interesting players like Kompany and Zabaleta that ended up being very good players for that club as well. It's just, it doesn't seem like they've got the right concoction. It doesn't seem like it's the right way going forward. It's almost a blueprint that a club with a little bit of cash to spend just tends to try and buy names and then see if they gel together in some kind of form. But it's clearly not working on a consistent basis anyway, at least. But there is one man I really want to mention, Rich, and that's the goal scorer, really, Morgan Sanson, who I believe is probably, other than maybe Thauvin, you might say, Marseille's most consistent player this season, hasn't he? Or maybe even over the last sort of 18 months.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his. I think he's been given a slightly unfair rub of the green. I think of late he's not been in the squad quite as often, with a desire to pair Gustavo with Zambo Anguissa. I think what he can offer is when he's on his day, exceeds pretty much any of those Marseille midfielders. He's got the creativity, he's got the range of passing, he can pop up with the odd goal. He's willing to track back. He's willing to tackle. He's still a relatively young guy, and they need to give him time. He was. I think he was certainly, when they had their bout of signings since McCourt came in, he's certainly one of the ones that made me stand out and think, actually, you know what, Marseille know what they're doing. There's others that have made me think to their transfer policy, but Sanson was one of those. You think, yeah, actually, you know what, they know what they're doing there. they're picking off those excellent young players. It's very much like the Lyon of a few years ago, of pick off the quality players within your own league, because chances are you're going to get them at a pretty good price. I'm hoping that this goal, combined with, as you say, the sort of good run of form that he's had of late, will ensure that he can have a cast iron spot in that starting 11, because I certainly think he deserves it. I think he's definitely got the quality. He just needs to have the faith, I think, shown in him by Garcia.
Yeah, and hopefully he does get a better run when Luis Gustavo comes back, because he is a real force in that midfield, and he played a number of different jobs. I mean, he made an excellent tackle and was in the perfect positioning for it as well in a Bordeaux counter-attack on the first half, and obviously he ends up in that around about the same area in the box to score the goal that nicks the point at the end as well. It's a very impressive display, and he has really risen to the occasion since joining from Montpellier. But we go on to our final main bit of the show, at least, and it's our Ligue 1 snapshots. And I'll start with you, Peter. What's your snapshot this week?
My non-football snapshot will be the use of sofas, as it is Ligue 1 Conforama on the sideline at Toulouse. Very comfortable viewing. And my football one is based on how tight Ligue 1 is, and that is summed up by the fact that no side from 2nd to 11th, so that's Monaco, Lyon, Marseille, Nantes, Caen, Saint-Etienne, Montpellier, Bordeaux, Toulouse, and Rennes, none of them won this weekend, which essentially you could say is giving PSG their run for the title, I guess. Yes, but it's condensing, and we were talking about the bottom half of the table, and it's because it's taking points off the top half, so that's good for competition.
Yeah, unless you're Paris Saint-Germain, I'm pretty sure they'll be delighted to have taken at least 2 points off of every single team in the rest of the top half this weekend. And I enjoyed the sofas at Toulouse as well, but I do feel sorry for those VIP fans that they had to withstand, shall we say, that 0-0 draw at.
It serves them right for choosing to lose.
Yeah. Why they chose to lose Met's game to have sofas on the side of the pitch, I will never know. But that's a question for another time, I think. Rich, what's your snapshot?
Very briefly, mine's just going back to the Bordeaux-Marseille game, and just the taking off at half-time of Payet. Yes, I'll cut him some slack that he's had a slightly injury-prone season, but by and large, he's been so far off the boil. He returned to Marseille from his season and a bit with West Ham to sort of great fanfare. He was coming back home, if you like, to the club that he loved, and he's just not been the same player. I mean, I think he's been by and large pretty poor. Yes, as I say, this season injury has not helped with that, but I think even when we have seen him play, he's been nowhere near his best. And if I'm perfectly honest, at the minute, he's nowhere near that French squad. And I think in terms of his World Cup aspirations, I think unless something significant happens post-Christmas, I just don't see him making that World Cup squad.
And with that competition as well in front of him, it is only going to be harder as well, unless he has a spectacular final 6 months of the season, really. I've got three. So the first two are a little bit smaller and then a nice one to end with. The first is the South Korean connection we saw at Dijon. Two players, for the first time ever for either side, scoring from the wonderful nation. Chang Hoon Kwon for Dijon and Hyun Suk for Twice. It's excellent to see more nationals come into the fantastic league, and both were the first two scorers of South Korean descent in Ligue 1 as well. So great to see them both performing well, especially Kwon. He does look like a tidy little player for Dijon. Set up Tavares' second as well, which was a really nice cross. My second is Wesley Sneijder, who started at the weekend against Caen. I thought he had a really nice little game. It might have gone under the radar, given it was for a Nice side that have struggled as of late. They are just above the drop zone at the moment, but he was really influential. It was more of what you would maybe expect from a Wesley Sneijder. He doesn't have the pace, but he clearly still has the vision and creativity to really instigate a Nice side that they maybe missed when someone like Belhanda did it last season, and especially when Seri's not in the side, they need someone to drive them forward, and it led to eventually a Pierre-Lise Melou goal where I still can't believe Ekut. If Ekut stands up, he saves that goal. If he stands still, he saves the goal. Instead, he actually intentionally dives out of the way of the shot.
It was a dreadful finish, wasn't it?
It was abysmal. Lise Melou had 2 strikes on goal. Both were exactly at the goalkeeper, and one went in. And that was only because the goalkeeper decided that he'll let him score this time. I think it was a pity thing more than anything. And the final one was the incredible quote-unquote bant that we saw at Lyon, although it was a relatively dull affair in terms of Montpellier doing what Montpellier have been excellent at this season, of completely killing games against a big sides. But the fans on the 18th minute heralded their suspended captain, Nabil Fekir, by all displaying a number of shirts held up in their tribulation. Fekir himself in the stands was thoroughly enjoying it, and it's nice to see the Lyon fans still enjoying that moment. They might do it for a little while longer yet, I have a feeling. So we finished this week with, we haven't got an enormous amount of time, so I will just go for the one question time, but it is a 2-part question, so it's a little bit longer, and it's from the Australian OL fan, and it's great to hear from you. Again, 2-part question. The first part is the current PSG model enhancing or harming the progress of Liga as a whole. Now, there was an excellent article in the New York Times, if you've not seen it already, by his name slips my mind at the moment. It's Rory.
Rory Smith.
Yeah, it was a superb piece on especially the inside looking out from Lille, especially the fact that Paris Saint-Germain might have not harmed the league in terms of being the sort of dominant force, maybe more like the Bundesliga, where it shined a light on the league and the potential for cash coming into clubs when the TV rights deal comes up at the end of the next year, that there might be a little bit more pie to share. What are your quick thoughts on that one, Rich, first?
I think in terms of enhancing the league, I think the PSG model, short-term and arguably mid-term, probably is not. I think overall it's causing that sort of huge divide between the sort of haves and have-nots. Long-term, though, I remain a bit more positive. I think, look at the players that they've brought in. Yes, they've spent ludicrous sums of money, but they're bringing in the big-name players now, the globally well-known players. And simultaneously, then we're going to start to see more money come into the league. Other oligarchs, other oil barons, other incredibly rich people are going to see Ligue and think, well, actually, you know what? There's an opportunity there. Premier League, there's not really. Spain's difficult to get into. Germany's even more difficult to get into. If we want some of this investment in football, then maybe France is the place to go. So I think longer term, the PSG model, I think, can enhance the progress of the league. I just think it's a little short-term sort of damage causing.
Yeah, and I'll give the second part to you, Peter, really, and that's what needs to happen for Liga and clubs to progress in terms of competition domestically and in a European scale. Obviously, Monaco sort of booked that trend last season. Is large-scale investment the only real hope for lower teams? You're thinking of someone just buying a club and trying the best, maybe a la Lille at the moment, possibly, or can clubs adopt more of the Lyon model, where they're more of a self-sustaining club, as the Australian OL fan admits to here? And I also just want to throw in, obviously, Monaco's model of trying to buy a couple of talents as well and nurture them and sell them on for a profit and lather, rinse and repeat, really. What do you think is maybe the best for keeping the competition in the short term?
Okay, well, in terms of competing in Europe, there is, at the moment, it's 100% investment in your squad, and that would have to mean intense amount of wealth. You look at the sides that make the top 8. Monaco bucked the trend. It was fantastic that they did that. The last 8, in the Champions League, all of them have enormous amounts of money behind them. So if you're looking at that sort of level in terms of European football, then that's what it's got to be. What I would say is that most French clubs are aiming at the Lyon model. I would say that Rennes' investment in the summer, for example, was based on the idea of buying young to sell higher, in the same way that Monaco have done so successfully. And I think that is a model to be followed. Lille, again, also looking at the Monaco model, buy cheap, sell for more. And it can work to an extremely good level, as Monaco showed, depending on the kind of players you bring through. Lyon have got a fantastic conveyor belt of talent, and that's helped by the academy. And that is something that is actually reflected across the league and across French football as a whole. It seems to be something that French football is good at, is bringing through young talent. And you only have to see the strength and depth in the French national squad and through the youth systems to the caliber of players bringing through. And that is all aided, of course, by Ligue and the opportunities that clubs are able to provide their young players. Because when they lose a player, for example, if they're injured, they will give youth a chance. They will push through their younger players because there isn't that kind of money floating around to bring in a player for 15 million euros just for as a stopgap or as a temporary fix. So it's a bit of both. I think if you want to be at the elite level, you've got to do a PSG and you've got to smash transfer windows. And unless the financial parity between major clubs evens out and seeps down, which it doesn't look like it will do with their urges to break away and whatever else, then for clubs it's the buy and sell and sustain yourself in the best way possible, and to generate that wealth on your own. But even Monaco, for example, started with a financial basis. I mean, they had Rybolovlev. Have I said his name right?
Yes.
It's a bit of both. If you want to do well in Europe, you need the money. But I think the Lyon model, the Monaco model, I would call it potentially a Ligue 1 model because it is quite pervasive across the league, is a way forward to them to do well in Europe, but potentially not win the competition if you're looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah, there's a number of things that sort of we delve into this. I agree that the Monaco one is probably easier to follow. I mean, in fairness to Lyon, they have an incredible conveyor belt of talent, and they always have done. And while other sides have bits here and there, or maybe a generation of maybe 3 or 4 that if they get lucky, they're not quite as blessed as the former champions of the early 2000s to have a real momentum in that one. And I tell you what, I would just to very quickly finish on that. If you are Rybolovlev at the moment, you will be happy because he also sold a painting for $400 million this week as well, which is about the same amount he sold players for in the summer. So he's rolling in it again. It's blessed to be him at the moment, at least anyway. That's all from us this week. My thanks to Rich, Peter, and all of you listening at home. Join us for the preview show on Thursday. We'll be joined by special guest Eric Devin as well. And the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt and goodbye.